So this evening, which is the 27th of July, 2022, we're continuing to look at this fifth point of mind training called the extent of proficiency in mind training, which again sounds so, we have to take stock, decide how we're doing. I guess that makes a certain amount of sense. But it sounds so achievement oriented, and that's not really what it's about. The first of the slogans in this fifth point we talked about last time around. All instructions have one aim. That aim being, in the words of Jamgon Kongtrul, to tame ego clinging. Another way of putting it would be to letting go more and more of identifying with the part of us that wants and doesn't want and judges and criticizes and grasps things, and identifying more and more with that spacious openness, and open-heartedness, that warmth, the spontaneous compassion that can arise, that we identify more and more with that. And the extent of proficiency, if you're trying to keep track of how am I doing with this, can be looked at from that standpoint as, am I being less self-centered, be one way to put it. Am I less ego involved with having everything be the way I think I need to have it be? Am I more focused on what's happening with the other people around me? Then that would feel more at ease. Another way of looking at it as well. This next aphorism or slogan, according to, again, where is it? There it is. My camera is different. There it is. Just for those that are unaware, just in case. According to this book, is 2 testimonies. Rely on the important one. And I'll simply read what he has to say. It's a little different in our world than it might be in his, in terms of being seen as a, quote, Dharma person. He says, for other people to see you as a Dharma person is one testimony. But ordinary people do not know what is hidden in your mind and may just be taking joy in certain improvements in the way you act. And there's no harm in that. You know, if we're acting in ways that other people find a little more palatable, you know, I wouldn't sniff at that. But he says that's not what it is. He says, one sign of proficiency in mind training is that there is never any shame or embarrassment about your state of mind. There is never any shame or embarrassment about your state of mind. You're beginning to see that what arises into the mind is based on causes and conditions. And whatever arises is like the weather. Oh my goodness, look at that, it's sleeting. Oh my goodness, it's 95 degrees. It's simply arising from a myriad of causes and conditions, and now it's presenting like this. And it's the same with what's happening. There's our mind is presenting this way now. There's no need to be ashamed or embarrassed about it. The next question is, okay, now that has happened, how do I want to be now? Knowing that that is there, where do I go with that? You know, how do I nurture seeds that move away from suffering for myself and others, and not cultivate or water the seeds that cause that suffering? You that comes up after we've said, oh yeah, well, there it is. And when that sort of matter of fact acceptance, is an acceptance of our state of mind comes up, he says, well, that's a sign also. When you think of something you don't cringe about the way you wish you weren't. Consequently, do not be attached to the judgment of others, but rely principally on the testimony of mind itself. People don't know what is hidden in your mind. That's all he has to say. That's his entire commentary on that point. Some of our other teachers go on in greater length, and some quite lengthy, actually. I'm going to continue to read from our teachers. This time it'll be this one here, Lojong. Sorry, I'm having a hard time. Here we go. I can do it better this way. There we go. He says, other people's opinions are very often not the same as our opinion of ourselves. It may be that people fail to see our inner qualities and judge us harshly. Or it may be that we are being overly critical of ourselves, while others see us in a very understanding and forgiving light. It is more often the case, he says, however, that we have the more positive opinion of ourselves. And my mind said, well, maybe, but I think our culture is, we tend to be a self-critical bunch of people, I think, and very often we are more critical of ourselves than we are of others. But you can go either way, and at times we all go in both ways. So just what we see is not the same as what others see, and so forth. Let's see, I'm trying to keep this relatively short. So I'll go here. There are two parts to how we go about our self-assessment. The first is to know what we are really like in spite of our delusions, limitations, and self-deceptions. And that can be a pretty neat trick. If we're having delusions and self-deceptions, then how do we know what we're really like? If we really knew we were deluding ourselves, they would no longer be self-delusions, would they? We aren't trying to judge ourselves to determine whether we're a good or bad person. We aren't trying to judge ourselves to determine whether we're a good or bad person. And some people get caught up in that idea in this little section. We're trying to assess how to overcome certain negative habits or work with our tendency to harbor negative thoughts and attitudes. Again, it's simply, oh, there they are. They've arisen because of causes and conditions. Now, what do I want to do with them? If I'm with somebody else and they've arisen toward them, do I want to blurt them out? Or might I be asking, oh, is that really true, these things I'm thinking? Would it really be helpful or kind to be able to say these things? To accept, without calling ourselves bad or good, what's arising, and then to work with it is what this practice is about. The fact that we have these negative habits and tendencies, he really kind of stresses this, doesn't make us bad people. And it kind of reminds me of the previous comment from Jamgun Control about not to have shame or embarrassment about our state of mind. It's just what has arisen. So he continues along on, well, how do we really determine, how do we can look at ourselves and really make an assessment of some kind. He says, however, a genuine effort to determine what we think and feel about ourselves will ensure that our self-knowledge is more accurate than anybody else's opinion of us. Other people may see good or bad qualities in us that we fail to recognize. And we may sometimes make errors of judgment about ourselves. Only we can really judge our true character. Self-deception is a very strong tendency. We can fool ourselves that we're better or worse than we really are. But despite this tendency, it's possible to learn to make an honest assessment of ourselves if we persevere with our meditation practice. So here he's bringing in our meditation practice into this particular slogan of relying on the primary testimony, the testimony of our own mind. Saying, yeah, we delude ourselves all the time, and we conceive ourselves as better or worse than we actually are. But if we really are sitting in meditation and watching our minds and being willing to allow what's there to be present without judging it or without feeling embarrassment or shame, or for that matter, great pride or arrogance, in that state, we can more and more see things more clearly. This isn't an easy process, he says, just in case, well, yeah. And we may remain a mystery to ourselves for a very long time. But our self-deceptions are not really intractable problems. They are relatively easy to overcome once we recognize that their comforting illusions are unnecessary. We're trying to protect ourselves with these skewed views of ourselves in various directions, and we really don't need to do that. We can accept ourselves as we are. We can take what's there and move in ways that are healthy, that are warm-hearted, that are compassionate, that deepen our understanding. If we're already familiar with the power of exposure, we'll be practiced at making an honest assessment of ourselves. You remember the powers, the 5 powers. There was one that was called repudiation, you may recall. That's the one that he calls exposure. He's not saying that we need to, as something arises, repudiate it, but simply to see it. Pull the curtain back. Oh, isn't that interesting? And if a thought arises of, geez, I don't like that at all, or even, oh, yuck, whatever it might be, to be accepting of that as well. Oh, gee, that thing arose and apparently I don't like it. And then to treat ourselves the way we might treat a very good friend that came to us and opened their hearts and let us see something that they were distressed by. Can we do that with ourselves? Can we allow these things to arise and be compassionate to ourselves? He finishes with this little bit here. As ordinary sentient beings, we'll never completely rid ourselves of egoistic thoughts and desires. It's more a question of making an honest assessment of our qualities and gradually reducing our self-obsessive tendencies. This is written by a very deep practitioner, one of the Rinpoches. As ordinary sentient beings, we'll never completely rid ourselves of egoistic thoughts and desires. It's more a question of making an honest assessment of our qualities and gradually reducing our self-obsessive tendencies. Going right back to that first point, what's the one point where the Dharma always agrees? It's either taming the ego or no longer identifying with it. He's pointing right there again. If we can appraise our attitudes as more open, tolerant, loving, and compassionate toward ourselves and others, we don't have to question the effectiveness of our mind training practices. If we can appraise our attitudes as more open, tolerant, loving, and compassionate toward ourselves and others, we don't have to question the effectiveness of our mind training practices. If we honestly appraise our attitudes toward ourselves as less tolerant, loving, and compassionate, and we have the same appraisal of what we're looking at with other people, then we might need to say, wow, this isn't taking hold somehow. Maybe I need to go back and look at these, the 4 mind turnings again. Am I looking at things as having causes and conditions, or am I just blaming things? Am I seeing things as impermanent, or do I expect things that I want to stay there? And of course they won't. We can go back to the practice of touching spaciousness and go back to the practice of Tung Glen. In fact, we shouldn't be going back to it. We should be doing it anyway. But that practice of allowing ourselves to be aware of the pain and suffering that we're experiencing in various ways, and being judgmental and critical is one of those. Being judgmental and critical is suffering. Whether it's of ourselves or whether it's other people, that in itself is suffering. So when that's present, to say, oh, look, it's present. We can be aware of that being such a human quality. We can be aware of accepting that as so, of breathing that in, of letting the judgmental criticalness of others meet our own, of allowing that open-heartedness, that spacious heart that we have to transform that as we see it more clearly, and to offer to ourselves and others what is needed. It can be so many things: loving kindness, patience, generosity, breathing that out to ourselves, to others. So I think I'll stop on that point, that on the 2 judges rely on the principle 1, that only we can really see what's going on, but it takes some practice to do that. Meditative practice, deep looking practice, being aware of our true motivations in that deep looking, and so on. So I will stop and I will turn the recording off.